Imagine being accused of something you didn't do. Imagine being locked in a prison cell for decades, missing birthdays, family moments, and the life you dreamed of. This is what happened to Vincent Simmons. He spent 44 years in Angola State Penitentiary for a crime he says he didn't commit. 44 years. But through all the pain, the fear, and the loneliness, he never gave up hope. Today, we share the story of Vincent Simmons, a man who survived the impossible, fought for his freedom, and finally got his life back. This is his journey. Before we dive in, family, make sure you subscribe to Black Journey and hit that bell because I share powerful new stories with you every single day. Now sit back, relax, and let me take you into this amazing story you don't want to miss. The room was silent when the verdict came down. Vincent Simmons stood there in that Louisiana courtroom in 1977, hands and feet shackled, surrounded by people who didn't know him, didn't care about him, and didn't see him as a man. He was 25 years old, still young enough to believe life might surprise him, still hoping someone would hear the truth in his voice. But that day, hope was a stranger. The jury didn't even look him in the eye as they pronounced him guilty. 2 counts of attempted aggravated rape, 100 years in Angola State Penitentiary. A sentence so heavy it didn't feel real at first. The words rolled off the judge's tongue like a death sentence wrapped in legal language. Vincent's world blurred. He glanced around the courtroom, his gaze searching for a friendly face, for anyone who would see his terror. But no one met his eyes. The 2 white girls who accused him sat across the room. The jury was all white. The judge was white. The prosecutors were white. And Vincent, a black man from a poor Louisiana town, knew the truth. He never had a chance. In that era, in that courtroom, his skin color alone was evidence enough. He was escorted out in chains, his wrists aching from the cuffs digging into his skin, his head spinning. He wanted to scream, to tell them again that he was innocent, but the words caught in his throat. Nobody wanted to hear him. The trial had lasted only a few days, but its weight crushed him. That was the day Vincent Simmons disappeared from the outside world. Angola Penitentiary loomed like a dark shadow as the prison gates closed behind him. They called it the farm, but it wasn't a farm. It was a former slave plantation turned into a maximum security prison. Vincent was now one of thousands of black men forced to work the same land where enslaved people had once toiled under the hot Louisiana sun. Angola was not built for rehabilitation, it was built to break men. Vincent felt that the moment he stepped through those gates. The guards barked orders, their voices cold and clipped. The clanking of metal doors echoed like thunder. He was stripped of his clothes, his freedom, and his name. In Angola, he was not Vincent anymore. He was just a number. Those first years were the hardest. Vincent was surrounded by violence and despair. Prison fights erupted over scraps of food or glances exchanged too long. Guards treated men like cattle, herding them to work the fields with guns slung over their shoulders. The air was thick with sweat, anger, and hopelessness. For a while, Vincent wondered if it would be easier to let himself die, if surrendering would hurt less than surviving. But something deep inside refused to give in. He clung to his innocence like a lifeline. He told himself over and over, "I did not do this. I do not belong here." Days turned into years. Vincent filed appeal after appeal, but every letter came back stamped with the same word: denied. He sat in his cell at night, staring at the ceiling, the hum of fluorescent lights. Above him, a constant reminder that this was his life now. Outside those walls, seasons changed. Families grew older, the world moved on. But Vincent was stuck in a place where time stood still. His parents grew old while he was locked away. Friends he grew up with died before he ever had the chance to see them again. He missed funerals, weddings, the birth of nieces and nephews. All he could do was imagine their faces, his memories of them fading like photographs left in the sun. Solitary confinement became a regular part of his life. The punishment cells were dark, small, and suffocating. He spent weeks at a time in a space no bigger than a bathroom, where the only sounds were his own breathing and the clang of a metal door. The loneliness gnawed at him, But Vincent refused to let it kill his spirit. He prayed. He repeated scriptures he'd memorized as a boy. He whispered to himself, "You're innocent. Hold on." Some men lose themselves in prison, but Vincent decided he would not. He taught himself the law, reading thick legal books that other inmates ignored. He became his own lawyer because no one else cared to fight for him. He studied every detail of his trial transcript until he could recite it word for word. He knew every inconsistency in the girls' stories, every flaw in the state's case. He knew there was a medical report that showed no evidence of assault. He knew the prosecutor had hidden it. And he knew one day, no matter how long it took, he would prove it. Years passed, and Vincent became a mentor to younger prisoners. They called him OG out of respect, but he didn't just wear the title. He listened to their pain, counseled them, and told them to hold on to their humanity, even in a place designed to strip it away. Vincent's calm presence became a source of strength inside Angola's walls. Even guards began to treat him with a wary respect. He wasn't loud or aggressive, but there was something unbreakable in him. Then came 1993. 16 years had passed since his conviction when Vincent finally got access to his case file. He sat in a cold prison library, his hands shaking as he opened the manila envelope. Inside was the proof he had been searching for. The medical exam clearly stated that the girls had no physical signs of sexual assault. Early police reports revealed that the girls had first told officers they didn't know their attacker. These weren't minor mistakes, they were deliberate omissions, buried evidence that could have changed everything. Vincent felt the breath leave his body as he read those pages. Tears filled his eyes, not just for himself, but for every man who had ever been silenced by this system. He was right. All these years, he had been right. Armed with this evidence, Vincent began his fight anew. He filed motion after motion, but the system resisted him. Louisiana's courts were slow to admit they had done him wrong. His requests were denied over and over, but Vincent's determination only grew stronger. He refused to die behind those walls. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for dignity, for truth, for every black man whose life had been stolen by injustice. Inside Angola, he became a living legend, not because of his toughness, but because of his unshakable faith. Vincent Simmons was a man who had been crushed and yet refused to break. And then, after more than 4 decades of struggle, February 2022 arrived. Vincent, now 70 years old, gray-haired and weathered, stood in a courtroom once again. But this time, the air was different. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to the arguments, and finally spoke the words Vincent had been waiting to hear for 44 years. His trial had been unfair. He was granted a new trial. Vincent Simmons was free. As he walked out of Angola's gates, the sunlight felt foreign against his skin. The open air smelled like hope. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, but living it was surreal. Vincent didn't run or shout. He simply walked forward, slow and steady, his head held high. After everything they took from him, he still had his dignity. The air outside Angola was heavy that February morning, but to Vincent Simmons it felt like freedom itself. The sky seemed wider than he remembered, the sun brighter, and every breath of Louisiana air filled his lungs like it was his first. After 44 years of breathing recycled prison air, this was different, almost too much to take in at once. Vincent didn't rush. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had spent decades imagining this moment and didn't want to waste a single second of it. His face carried the marks of time, deep lines etched from years of hardship, his hair now gray, his shoulders slightly stooped. But there was still something unbreakable in his presence. Vincent Simmons walked out of Angola a free man, and though his body bore the scars of incarceration, his spirit was whole. Cameras clicked, news crews crowded around, asking questions, but Vincent didn't rush to speak. His silence said everything. After all, what words could capture the pain of having 4 decades of your life stolen? He had gone into prison a young man in his 20s. Now at 70, he was stepping into a world he barely recognized. Technology had transformed everything. Cell phones, the internet, social media. Cars looked different. The slang was unfamiliar. Even the roads he once knew had changed. The world had moved on without him. But Vincent took it all in quietly, with the patience of a man who had been forced to wait far too long for this day. For his first night of freedom, Vincent stayed with supporters who had fought for his release. That evening, they brought him a birthday cake, his first birthday cake in 44 years. As he leaned over the candles, tears welled in his eyes. The room was filled with people cheering, clapping, smiling, but Vincent just stared at those flickering flames. So many birthdays had passed without celebration, marked only by another day behind bars. This one was different. He took a deep breath and blew out the candles, the simple act feeling like a quiet revolution. Freedom was beautiful, but it was also overwhelming. Vincent admitted later that he didn't even know how to use a smartphone, how to swipe a screen, or send a text. The simplest things, like walking into a grocery store, felt like stepping onto another planet. Bright lights, music playing over loudspeakers, the endless rows of food. In prison, meals had been metal trays of bland, portioned food. Now, standing in front of shelves filled with hundreds of choices, Vincent felt dizzy. Too much, he whispered under his breath. 44 years behind bars doesn't just take away time. It rewires your entire way of living. Yet even as Vincent adjusted to his new world, he carried the weight of his old one. Angola wasn't just a prison. It was a machine built on pain, a place where cruelty and racism had deep roots. Vincent had seen men beaten, broken, and left behind. He'd buried friends who died waiting for justice that never came. Freedom didn't erase those memories. At night, he sometimes woke up gasping for air, his mind still trapped in that tiny cell. Decades of survival don't disappear overnight, but Vincent refused to let bitterness define him. Instead, he chose grace. In interviews, he spoke softly, never raising his voice, but every word carried the weight of his story. "God kept hope alive in me," he said. And those weren't just words, they were the truth. Hope had been his weapon, his armor, his lifeline in a place designed to crush him. The prosecutor, Charles Riddle, decided not to retry Vincent's case, but he didn't declare him innocent either. Instead, Riddle said he wanted to spare the victims from reliving their trauma. Vincent, however, knew what this meant. There would always be people who doubted him. Some would still believe the lies that had put him behind bars. But Vincent didn't fight for freedom to convince the world. He fought for himself, for his dignity, and for the truth. And for him, the truth was clear. His story struck a nerve across the country. Here was a man who had spent more than half his life behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. His case was a stark reminder of a justice system that has too often failed black men. In rural Louisiana in the 1970s, Vincent's fate was sealed the moment he was accused. The trial was just a performance to legitimize an injustice. Decades later, even with evidence of misconduct, the fight to free him had been a battle against a system that resists admitting its own mistakes. Yet Vincent stood tall, not just as a survivor, but as a symbol. His life story carried echoes of history, of enslaved men who had once labored on the same Angola fields where he was forced to work. That prison was built on the bones of plantations, and Vincent's life became part of that grim legacy. But by walking out of Angola with his head held high, he broke a cycle. He turned himself into proof that hope is stronger than oppression. After his release, Vincent began speaking about prison reform and wrongful convictions. He didn't want his story to just be about pain. He wanted it to be a warning, a call to action. "How many more are in there?" he asked. "How many men are locked up right now for something they didn't do?" His words weren't bitter, they were heavy with the weight of experience. People were struck by Vincent's humility. Despite everything he had endured, he wasn't angry, in a way that consumed him. Instead, he carried himself with quiet dignity. "I don't want revenge," he said softly. "I want peace." Those words resonated deeply, especially in black communities that had seen generations of injustice. Vincent's story wasn't just his own. It belonged to every black man who had been over-policed, falsely accused, and denied justice. Yet even with his freedom, Vincent faced challenges. 44 years in prison doesn't just take away time, it erases your financial future. He left Angola with no savings, no retirement, no compensation for the decades he lost. He had to rebuild from nothing at 70 years old. He also had to learn to navigate a world that had evolved without him. The internet, smartphones, even the slang and music, all of it felt foreign. But Vincent approached it like he had approached every obstacle in prison, patiently, one step at a time. At his core, Vincent remained a fighter. In 2022, he filed a civil rights lawsuit against the officials who had suppressed evidence in his case. He wasn't just seeking justice for himself, but demanding accountability from a system that had destroyed so many lives. His legal battle continues. But Vincent's very existence as a free man is already a victory. He spends much of his time now talking to young people, sharing his story so they understand both the dangers of injustice and the power of resilience. When he speaks, there is a softness to his tone, but every sentence carries decades of struggle. People listen because Vincent Simmons doesn't just talk about pain, he embodies what it means to survive it. In the end, Vincent's life is not just a tragedy. It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit. They locked him away for 44 years, tried to erase him, but they failed. He walked out of Angola with his dignity intact, his faith unshaken, and his hope alive. And in doing so, Vincent Simmons became a symbol of something bigger than himself, a reminder that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that even in the darkest places, light can break through. For Vincent, freedom is no longer a dream. It's a reality he greets each morning with gratitude. The wind on his face, the sound of birds, the taste of food he chooses himself. These are things he will never take for granted again. His story is painful, yes, but it is also beautiful. Because it is the story of a man they tried to bury, yet he rose. Would you like me to also add a POW? Thank you for taking the time to hear Vincent Simmons' story. Stories like his remind us why we must stand for justice, dignity, and the power of hope. If Vincent's journey touched you, inspired you, or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Black Journey. We share real stories from Black lives, stories of courage, struggle, and triumph that the world needs to hear. Hit that subscribe button and join our community so you don't miss the next powerful story. Thank you for watching, and remember, every voice matters and every story deserves to be told.